Welcome to The Lost Debate, a show for political eclectics. I'm Ravi Gupta, and today I speak to Ross Barkan, who is a contributing writer to the New York Times Magazine and a columnist for New York Magazine. He has a novel coming out in May called Glass Century, and he's also just launched a literary magazine that we talk about. But this is one of those conversations where some of my favorite conversations are the ones where I have less of an agenda, where I'm just like, hey, here's somebody who has a eclectic way of seeing things and a deep knowledge of policy and politics. And let me just kind of see where the conversation goes. We start with a series of just observations about traditional media versus online media and some of the work Ross has been doing there. And then we evolve into a conversation about the future of the Democratic Party and, is the Democratic Party or the Republican Party a bigger tent? And what does it mean to be a big tent? And where do the dissidents and the conspiracy theorists go in this modern era? He has this theory that we're in a new romantic era that we spend some time on. And then towards the end, we geek out on New York City politics, where in that conversation, we kind of take for granted a certain knowledge base and interest in New York City politics. But if you're even remotely interested in that, stick around for that. But we put that to the back end of the episode because we know a lot of you around the country. So with that, let's jump into the interview. Ross, welcome back.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Well, okay, like you've been a busy man. I like to check up on you every time I'm interviewing you here. And so you have a novel coming out in May.
Yes,
and,
correct. It's called Glass Century.
And you've launched a literary magazine.
Yes, called the Metropolitan Review. We launched actually almost exactly 1 month ago. So it's been going really well. We've got a few different people involved. And we're reviewing both fiction, nonfiction, film, TV, all kinds of things, kind of filling a gap in the culture that's been left behind by the decline of reviewing in general, criticism in general. So I'm pretty excited about it. We've got a website, we've got a Substack, and we're launching a print issue, hopefully at the end of April. That's the goal, at least.
Well, let's start there, because you have been somebody who has made a name for yourself in traditional media recently in New York Magazine. So you still write long form articles and commentary there. Right. You've also been a critic of traditional media in some ways, even within the circle, right? You've been quite successful on Substack. Why now start a literary magazine? Because a lot of people are kind of moving away from these types of forms and being like, all right, and like in many ways, like you have, Substack is like, all right, like lean into the higher growth platforms that cost a lot less money to get to the end user.
Yeah. So part of the beauty of the Metropolitan Review is that we are based in part on Substack. So it's kind of a best of all worlds scenario. So I think, yes, it's very true. You've seen the tremendous growth of Substack newsletters in the last few years, more and more institutional players going to Substack. Recently, Paul Krugman leaving the New York Times for Substack, and then Jim Acosta is now on Substack, and many, many others, right? I think at the same time, there is still a hunger for some kinds of institutions or even umbrella organizations. I've seen this on Substack too, where you'll see people lament they have to subscribe to 10 or 15 or 20 or more newsletters to get all the writers they want. And some of them miss the bundle. So on one hand, the bundle has gone out. On the other hand, there's still room for it. So with the Metropolitan Review, in some ways, we are bundling some of the very best writers on Substack. And that's been very exciting, bringing in people that I think are very talented, some of whom have gotten plenty of attention and some of whom have barely published at all. And it's been a really nice mix of that. And I think what's exciting about Substack is it's this wonderful repository for talent, and you can find it pretty easily. I think pre in Substack it was much harder to do this. So we are taking donations and pledges on Substack. We haven't activated the subscriptions yet, but we've already gotten a decent number of pledges. We're really going to grow that. We're also going to be relying on some outside help as well. We were lucky to have a founding donor who very generously got us off the ground. I'll say one thing: it's much easier to do a literary magazine and book publication initiative than a conventional media organization, because we aren't, as of now, no one is getting paid. The money's going to the writers. At some point down the road, it would be good for some of us to get compensated for the work we do, but we don't have the ambitions to build out a newsroom or something like that. So it's easier in that way. If I were building a newsroom like the Free Press, I would need much more money. But luckily, we're not building to that scale. We want to have a good deal of money to pay writers, to run our print magazine, to compensate people better. But we're not looking to hire, 25 people. It's just not going to exist on that type of scale, at least for the foreseeable future.
And you said you call them donations. Are you guys a nonprofit?
So we're 501(c)(3), yeah. So yeah, we have Substack. We get the Substack subscriptions. But yes, anything you give us can be written off. So yeah, we are a 501(c)(3). We are incorporated, and that's a model that is good for this. And you're seeing actually more newsrooms go the nonprofit route as well. There's many more of them, including the city right here in New York. Of course, ProPublica being the big one.
Yeah,
So
we're a
it's an
nonprofit.
interesting.
Yeah,
Oh, there
that
you go.
we're
Yeah, no, it's more and more doing it that way, because if you can reach a point of sustainability, that's really the goal. You don't have to be accountable to, investors and a board, and worry about, turning 10 or 20% profit margins every year.
Well, it sounds like you're trying to solve for something in particular, and I kind of discovered your magazine because I was reading your piece about the new romantic era. Uh, and so it seems like this is related, right? Like you creating the review seems to be in some way related to your theory that we're kind of coming out of the equivalent of like the modern day version of the Enlightenment, and we're entering a new phase. Give us this metaphor here, because
Yeah.
I hope you're right, because I haven't thought of it as a romantic time to be alive. I think I would use a lot of other adjectives. So you kind of pumped me up a little bit with this piece.
So I would say, in terms of romanticism, it's not all wonderful and falling in love. If you look at the Romantic era, there was certainly a lot of political tumult and intellectual tumult, and it was a time of change and upheaval. So I don't want to paint it as now things were entering this great peaceful time. More so, it was a reaction to what came before. So you mentioned the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment era had been a real and had many good aspects to it. The movement toward logic and reason, new technologies. You of course have the Industrial Revolution, and the Romantic era is really a reaction to the Industrial Revolution. So of course you have all these new technological wonders, but there's a great deal of disruption. There are these. You have really awful working conditions. You have people being thrown out of work. The rise of the Luddite movement comes out of this period as well. Um, you have a deeper skepticism of all this technological change being thrust upon the populace very suddenly. And I think now what's very interesting is, in the 2010s, generally speaking, I'm generalizing, but I would say as a whole, people took a more positive view of technological change. Certainly, if you go back to 2008 and the rise of Facebook, then the rise of Twitter, the rise of Instagram, the digital media startup bubbles, tech was this sort of new benevolent thing that was going to change our lives only for the better. Very few people in 2007 and 2008 were thinking about the downsides of the smartphone. The iPhone was just this wonderful, magic granted to us. Now you get the supercomputer in your pocket. And I think for a long time, we as a culture took a fairly uncritical view of these technological changes. And I think that really started to change a lot at the end of the decade. And COVID really I think illustrated for a lot of people the downside of a tech of a tech world, of a world where tech conglomerates have so much power over us, a world where human interaction is no longer prioritized. You have now the rise of AI, and I write a lot about AI, and I'm someone who has been very skeptical of it if I try to understand it and really make the good faith effort. But I think what you're seeing with AI now, people enjoy Chat GPT and use it, right? But it's not granted with rapture. There is a large amount of skepticism. There are a lot of questions being asked. There's a lot of concern about what does it mean to decrease human agency, and what is the greater purpose of this, right? So you're asking a lot more questions. And I think coming out of the COVID era too, when I think of sort of this new romanticism, that there is a slow movement away from technology, and I think um, a growing feeling that human interaction must be prioritized more. You know, we saw with the closure of schools in 2020 and 2021, which created all these strange new political coalitions, right? If you told someone in 2019, the people arguing for in-person public schools and their value would be Republicans, it would sound very strange. And that's kind of what happened. Um, so you had this growing feeling that it actually does matter if people are together in the flesh in person. And I think you saw that in education. Virtual schooling was supposed to take over. I think, going back to the 2010s, there's a lot of talk about displacing the physical college as we know it, um, or the high school, the middle school, right? And you see a lot of that now falling flat. And then I think more, in my own life and in the literary world, there's been a growing emphasis on in-person events, on doing things, getting off the computer. You see readings that have hundreds of people now. You see a lot of new magazines and physical products starting. I think that the tangibility has become very important for people, something you can touch, something you can carry with you. We are so bombarded by the virtual all the time. And I'm not anti-tech myself, obviously. I use my laptop and my phone every day, all the time. But we're at a pivot point where it's more change is coming at us, and I think we're asking questions in a way that I don't think 10 years ago there was many questions being asked.
Yeah, and you talk about this in your piece that it's kind of in some ways collapsing the left and the right. Um, Yet it seems like the politics of both major political parties seem to be dominated by people who are extremely online. You know, like
Yes,
the
very much so.
conversations driving both parties. Like you look at, um, and in many ways the traps that both parties have fallen into. Right. So you think about where did the Democrats truly most noticeably go wrong? It was probably that period of time in the, you know, 2017 through mid Biden administration, right? Like where the sort of apex of very online, very out of touch conversations, a lot of posturing, a lot of performing, right? And then you think of where Republicans have gone wrong. I mean, in my opinion, there's a few, but you would say at this very moment, the fact that they're one of the most, if not the most powerful person in their party is a guy in Elon Musk who, with many talents, seems to be addicted to social media and obviously owns one of the largest social media platforms. And so much of the agenda of the party seems to be driven by the memes, the trolling, the owning the libs, the conversation online. But it seems like you might be more optimistic that a politics from the ground up could be coming here. Like, and I know you mentioned the school closures, and I know that was central to the
Yeah.
Republican project for sure. But what else?
Yeah. Musk is not popular, and how long Musk gets to run roughshod over the government, we will see. It seems like Trump likes him for now. Will Trump have Doge and Musk there in 1 year from now? I don't know. Um, I don't know if, suddenly we're going to get a much better politics. I can't promise that. I do think as the Democrats leave their online era, and I do think some of the critiques of the Democratic Party in 2025 are a little dated because if you listen to the actual prominent politicians and how they talk, I actually think there's been a shift. You listen
I
to
agree.
Chris Murphy,
Yeah.
obviously Ro Khanna, you can listen to Ruben Gallego, you can listen to the governors in various states.
Even
You don't.
Harris, despite her many, many flaws, was a different Harris in this
She
election that she was
was.
previously. It was too
Yes, she
little too
was.
late. It wasn't sharp enough. I mean, we can go through that. We've talked about it a lot on this podcast. I've been making this point too. Like, I think that the shift had happened. The voters just didn't fully give the Democrats credit for it.
Yeah, but I think to be
I,
fair, down the ballot, it was a pretty decent 2024 for Democrats, which got lost in this. I mean, originally on election night, it looked like it would be a real Senate wipeout, and it turned out not to be. You look at Slotkin's campaign and Jackie Rosen, Tammy Baldwin, right? Jared Golden wins, losing Camp Perez wins in the House. Democrats almost get Congress back. I mean, you're talking about Trump having a supposed landslide, but yet they have a two seat basically majority in the House, effectively 2-3 seat whatever. The Democrat Party's in a
and they
very
didn't even get a
weird
majority of the
place.
votes, and we
Yeah,
found ourselves in this weird place where, and I think Democrats were so self-reflective at times. I think people, or at least certain members of the party, I think are. It's like the beta stereotype, where we're like, let's like look at our flaws. And I did this. I did multiple
yeah,
episodes where I'm like, here's all of our problems, and I think that stuff is really important. At the same time, like, you imagine the shoe being on the other foot. Was on the other foot. Trump lost, and they had a much different project within their party, where Democrats are like, let's basically take every conceivable critique of the party and take it seriously, which they all can't be true if it was that close. Like, it couldn't be that you have that many problems as a
yeah.
party and you come within a couple percentage points of beating somebody in the most anti-incumbent environment the world has ever seen, probably. And yet I, like you, still want to have those conversations, but it feels like a loser's game in some ways. Like, this twist
Yeah,
yourself into a
I
pretzel.
mean, I certainly have written very critically about the party. I think the Harris campaign was quite bad. But part of that was the problem with the candidate and the way
Yes.
this process was produced. I think there were lessons. I think if you want to take very big lessons away from 2024, it's don't hide from the media, both traditional and non-traditional, which Harris she was too late to both. And I wrote a
Yes.
piece on Substack in September about this, how she had gone 5 weeks without talking to anyone except CNN in a joint interview with Tim Walz, which is very strange. And my
Yeah,
hope
that
is
is
that
weird. And just focusing on that for a second,
yes,
because I think, like, we were so, like, narrowly focused on each day during that campaign.
yeah,
That one sentence, I think, says so much, right? You have one opportunity to get out there, and the way they were running that campaign, I've been running this arena communications director trainings for years now, and I'm
yes,
in the middle of kind of modernizing the way we're thinking about it, not just within arena, and probably less so within arena, but more for campaigns generally, where the traditional role of a campaign communications director, and this, you ran for office, is like
real,
gatekeeper. Stop you from saying something stupid. Stop the foot in the mouth. Stop the sort of Todd Aiken style, like, meltdown that can happen in a campaign, right? That's the old way of doing things. And then, like, very meticulously push one message and do it in a way that's curated and careful, and then just blast it out through TV ads. And then, and really own the collective moments, like the debates, right? If you're scoring Harris on that scorecard, she did fairly well. I would say, like,
mhm,
the ads, I think I continue to be puzzled by, but obviously she crushed the debates. Um, but I think the role of communications director should now be, instead of trying to find ways to say no, which I think is how people have been trained, it's to find as many ways to say yes, right? Like, you have these people who, in the campaigns, like, you're looking at Kill Tony, or not that Kill Tony was going to have her on the pod, but, like, just pretend like these people are like, Joe Rogan, Kill Tony, like, all these people, like, random people, I have no idea who they are, who probably say insane things on a daily basis. And you're like sitting in the campaign and you're like, okay, how would this be received within this subgroup of the Democratic Party? It's not worth it. Let's just keep going. Or they could just ask me questions I'm not prepared for and I could sound bad or whatever. You got to imagine the modern campaign is just going to be like, let's just find ways to say yes. Like, unless like Nick Fuentes invites you on the pod, just like say yes to everything.
Definitely. And you saw it with Buttigieg and Liz Smith. I would say that campaign, as well as Bernie's in 16 and 20, was a fairly say yes campaign. That Bernie went on
Yeah.
Rogan, of course, got attacked by the left for it, and AOC effectively stopped campaigning for him in 2020 over it. So I agree with you in that in this very fractured media environment, the answer is not, oh, nothing matters. It's, oh, everything matters, right?
Yes.
Yes, do the New York Times. Yes, do CNN, but do the podcasts, do alternative uh, writers with followings. Find everyone, and you have to do it that way. And I do think every Democrat running in 2028 will look at the Harris campaign, and it's a blueprint of what not to do. And you're already seeing it, I think, with even the Gavin Newsoms of the world, and those who are very ambitious. I mean, they get it, right? You have to go everywhere. I mean, Trump too. I mean, Trump, for someone who is deeply hostile to all media, he's constantly available. He's talking to reporters all the time. He does the sit downs. He did even meet the press. I think with Welker. He's everywhere. So you have to be that way. There's no other way to be. And her approach was quite perplexing. I mean, the dark reality of it is Harris was very bad at these interviews. So I think the only counterpoint that I understood, that I still think she should have done them, is she wasn't good at them. She wasn't. It's hard. I think if the ways to relitigate 2024, I think, are to look at the strategies that failed. And I also think to even think about, how do people get elevated in politics? When you pick a running mate, right? The idea should be not just that you want to balance the ticket, quote unquote, or you want to get some edge. Because I don't think vice presidential candidates matter a ton. What you're really doing is elevating the future. You are
Yeah.
picking the future head of your party. Whoever you choose, now it's Vance for the Republicans. This is the person who's probably going to be your nominee one day. So when Biden picked Harris in 2020, they should have been thinking, this is the person, the Democratic Party, we want to carry us forward as soon as 4 years, because Biden was nearing 80 at the time. Harris had been a candidate who flamed out horrendously in the 2019 primary. I followed that very closely, as you did.
Same here. Yeah, we used to
She,
place people on that campaign as part of Arena, and I have to say,
yes,
like, I do not speak for the organization today in saying this, but back when I was running it, they were probably the campaign for which I received the most complaints from staffers about the working environment and how chaotic it was.
Yes, and that is very bad. And these are not the kinds of people who should be artificially given higher roles, which is what happened to Kamala Harris. She was a senator from California who ran for president, did poorly, as many candidates in that race did. She's not the only one, so I don't want to pick on her too much. But then she becomes vice president, right? Instead of, the governor of Michigan, Gretchen Whitmer, for example, or someone else. There's a large array of politicians who had experience running in tough states or running successful campaigns, who could have been chosen. So I think the Democratic Party, certainly whoever the 2028 nominee is, you got to be thinking hard about your vice president, your running mate. This person, you want, as a party, you have to be thinking beyond the campaign, the next 4 years, the next 8 years. I'm very curious to see what the DNC does now. There's been, I think, some skepticism about Ken Martin. I've interviewed him before. I think one thing Martin understands that is good is that you have to return to some version of the 50 state strategy. You can't literally do it, because there are places in America now, the Democratic Party is very badly damaged, but you got to try. Like, I saw Martin visited Texas recently. You've got to go to these state organizations here and start to see, like, where are the green shoots. I think also to be creative, obviously the DNC had nothing to do with the Dan Osborne campaign in Nebraska, but I think for people either in the Democratic Party or on the left in general, places where the Democratic Party at least is damaged for now, you have to be looking towards nudging an independent candidate and seeing what
Yes.
they can do. And you
Well,
take
that's the
Osborne
recipe, Ross.
over the
That's
Trump Republican.
Yeah, that's the recipe. If you look at, how did the opposition against Modi overperform, and how did the French coalition hold together? There was a lot of strategic thinking there, and in those cases, it's
Yes.
easier to do because they're parliamentary systems. So you're able to say, all right, the Congress Party was really good about ceding to local parties. Now, it's structurally very hard in the United States to do what they were doing there, but basically what they were doing is they were sitting across from all non-BJP opposition parties and saying,
Yes.
what's the numbers? Who's most likely to win this race? And whoever is at the bottom of the totem pole withdraws and gives their support to
Yes.
that person. That's how they did well. Now, it's structurally very hard for Democrats to do that, so you have to get really creative. I do agree that just putting people with independent labels out there who might not be great on signature Democratic
Right.
issues, like whatever, like even if it's like, I don't even need to name the issues. Everybody knows what they are. I like, gun control, abortion rights, whatever. Like, we're in a fight for survival for this democracy. So if somebody's like literally like, look, I believe in an independent Justice Department and FBI, and I don't think we should, cut taxes for the rich on the backs of poor Medicaid recipients. I'm like, okay, that's better than Ted
Yeah.
Cruz, right? So let's roll.
Yes.
So, you know what I'm saying?
It's weird. It is strange to me that in a matter of 4 years, maybe however many years, maybe less, the Republican Party became a bigger tent party. And I do think that is something the Democrats have to think about. I did this piece for New York Magazine about how Democrats lost the dissident vote. And there's, of course, it's very easy to sneer at Tulsi Gabbard and RFK Jr., right? You can call them Russian assets, you can call them opportunists, right? Fascists, whatever, right? The reality is there's a lot of people who are self-identified Democrats or were self-identified Democrats who like some of what Tulsi and RFK are selling, right? And you have to think about how did we get into a situation where these two people in particular, but others as well, could rather easily slide into the Republican coalition. There's not really a Democratic equivalent right now where the Democratic Party, it's not seen as this place that can welcome a lot of different ideologies, a lot of different viewpoints, a lot of arguments that to other people might seem very strange or even conspiratorial. I mean, Matt Iglesias has written about this. I think one thing he's done very well about how Democrats lost the conspiracy theorists. His point that it was once very bipartisan to be into conspiracy theories about JFK or 9/11 or the CIA. And obviously, you don't support those theories, but in a democracy, you need to be a place, especially in a two-party system that we have, you have to be a place where those kinds of people aren't completely freezing your party out, right?
Yeah.
And the Democratic Party, for a variety of reasons, became by 2024, a very college educated party, and one where, you know, the Tulsi RFK voter was done with them, and their standard bearers were very quickly moving into the Trump coalition. And one thing about the Trump coalition is since it is so ideologically flexible, all you really need to do is bend the knee to Trump. And
Well,
beyond
that's what I
that,
was gonna say.
you,
Is
you
like
get
how
you get to
how
do what you
dissident is
want.
it? Yeah, but
You
how
get to
dissident is it?
it's ideology on ideology and policy. It's quite multifarious, but you just have to support Trump. So look at Rubio versus Vance versus look at the foreign policy, right? Is a mess right now between you have your old hawks who don't know what to do, you have the new America firsters with Vance right around Ukraine. I mean, it's chaotic. I'm not saying it's hard to run a foreign policy this way, but you see them, you know,
There,
in power doing it.
I
The
agree with some of
Democratic
what you're saying.
Party needs more. Yes, you can have a cult. I'm not saying have a
Yeah, so
cult,
let's
but
let's
what I'm
let's drill down on the cult part of this, because I do
what
think
I'm
this is the key part of this. So, right, so you were talking about like I agree with a lot of what you're saying in terms of ideologically. I think that the question I'm wrestling with right now is the flexibility that you describe, which I see in some ways is a is that a transition or a permanent state, right? And part of what I'm looking at is, well, I don't want to use the word authoritarianism, but like it's hard to square picks like Don Bongino and Cash
Yeah.
Patel and even Pam Bondi. What is going on is, well, what's the ironing out? Like,
Yeah.
is it is it like, are we trying to get all on the same page on our immigration policy or whatever? Maybe. But what everybody's getting on the same page on is Trump himself. And
Mm.
what Trump is pretty consistent about is his consolidation of power, steamrolling of any meaningful process and legal barriers to him
Right.
exercising more control. And now our foreign policy of our country is to ally with people who are in way more extremes than us on these types of issues. And like a good test case is the Ukraine policy, right? Which is, Rubio, who had he started shifting before he was Secretary of State, but the magnet, the planet that he was orbiting was Trump when he was shifting. Vance similarly. What they all have in common is they will not piss off Trump. Like whatever
Hmm.
Trump is setting his sights on is what the ideology of the party is. And through all the chaos, there's one consistency, which is and Tulsi has this problem too, a reverence for authoritarianism in a way that our country has not seen in a while. Like people can poke holes at the Democrats, but like I feel like that
Hmm.
is at least I would have a hard time squaring the Cash Patel Don Bongino with their equivalents in like within Democratic
No, there's no
administration.
equivalent in the Democratic
Yeah.
Party. I'm very curious. We aren't going to find out for a while what the post-Trump Republican Party looks like. How does this hold together without him? At some point, he's going to not be president. At
This is
some
why
point,
Musk is so important, Russ, because he's younger, he's rich, he can't be president, but he can, if he sticks around and makes this alliance with Trump work, which obviously none of us know. These are two volatile characters with humongous
right. We don't
egos.
we don't know.
Yeah. But you can imagine if
It's
Trump passed away tomorrow and it were
right.
Vance, the Vance Musk alliance to me feels more durable than the Trump Musk alliance because Vance has shown himself to be a really good user of Silicon
Hmm.
Valley folks. Like, I mean, he got here in part because he played a bunch of people in Hollywood and Silicon Valley to get to where he is. Um, and and they also share in many ways, like I would say, they both have, you talk about flexibility, right? They both have a
Right.
certain kind of flexibility. So I think in some ways he's an even better vessel. I think
I think
Musk
that's
is Trump's
true.
vessel, whereas Vance would be Musk's vessel, if that makes any sense.
I think that's all true. I think the wrinkle is, does Vance have what it takes to be Trump, right? Does Vance have the charisma? Does he have the ability to excite millions of people? Can he
No.
go around the country and pack arenas, right? Trump is this remarkable political figure, someone who, like Obama, arouses great passion in people, right?
Yeah.
Obama could do a crowd better than anyone, and Trump can do a crowd. So I do think this is going to be an issue for the Republican Party because if Trump is gone, the knives are out. Vance cannot subdue the factions of the Republican Party. Then ambition will take over. There's going to be a fight. I think, yes, Vance is the favorite, but the 2028 primary and beyond, it's going to get messy for the post-Trump world. It's easy right now. You have daddy in charge and you're feeling very good. He's Trump is going to get less popular. That's inevitable. Already there's been backlash to Doge. Whatever reconciliation bill that comes out of Congress is going to be a political gift to the Democratic Party. I think that's just the reality of how they do budgets, right? So Trump can hold it together because he is Trump. Yes, he is that. He certainly longs to be an authoritarian and a fascist. He doesn't have quite the savvy of a Putin or a Modi. And of course, the American system is more resilient than, the Indian democracy, which is
We'll
newer. And then, of
find
course,
out.
Russia
We'll
never really
find
had a
out.
democracy.
Yeah.
So I think, and Trump's also older. I don't know what's happening next. I really have no idea. I just think, yes, I agree with you. Vance is smarter. Musk is serious. At the same time, if you want to create this sort of techno-fascist alliance, you can do it. Easier said than done, especially if Musk is not well liked. And Vance himself struggles to arouse the same passions in the Republican base, right? Can Vance continue the march of the working class into the Republican coalition, which you saw with Trump? Some of that was inevitable sorting of people, socially conservative, moving out of the Democratic Party. Some of it was Democratic messaging, right? We've all talked about this. But then, if Vance is pitted up against, let's say, I said I put this out on Twitter X recently and got some blowback, but I stand by it. The Democrats haven't nominated for president a normally aged, normally charismatic person since Obama 2012.
Right.
Think about that, right? 3 straight elections: Hillary Clinton, Joe Biden, Kamala Harris. The Democratic Party's not sent their best.
Yeah.
If you think of the talent in the party who stood at the top in those 3 elections, these were not necessarily the most talented members of the party. And Biden's victory came in a very unique and strange moment coming out of COVID. So,
Yeah.
I'm very curious to see in 2028 what a normal Democratic Party primary looks like without the specter of any incumbent, without these various factors that influenced 2016 with Hillary consolidating the support of the establishment years ahead of time instead of Biden, which was odd if you look back on it, of course. And of course, then the Bernie campaign emerges, which is very unlikely primary campaign. What does your version of 2008 look like in 2028? So if the Democrats find their standard bearer who wins a normal primary, goes to all these states, right, hones the message, comes out of the convention with a mandate, which Harris had none of, though Democrats pretended she did. That's formidable. Whoever it is, I have no predictions. I'm not going to sit here and tell you it's going to be Wes
Stephen A. Smith.
Moore, Shapiro, or Stephen A. Smith. Let Stephen A. Smith compete. That's
Yes.
my let them all
All of
go.
them.
Go
Yeah.
to New Hampshire. New Hampshire. I'm very curious with the primary calendar for 2028. That's the
South
next
Carolina
fight.
is going to help him if he decides to jump in. That is for
It
sure.
would. I wonder if the DNC will keep it because it is a strange state to kick off your campaign with because it's very conservative. It doesn't elect Democrats at the general election level, and it's very anti-union. So maybe it stays, maybe it goes. We don't know yet. The New Hampshire faction will fight certainly to get New Hampshire back. So I don't know. I mean, that's the beauty of competition. That's what 2024 should have been. The alternate universe
Right.
2024 was Biden says, I'm not running after the midterms. I served the country. Here are all the great things we did. I now pass the torch. Maybe Harris runs in the primary and wins. Maybe she doesn't. That's the beauty of democracy. So we're gonna see it in 3 years. I think it'll be better for people.
Well, speaking of democracy, let's talk about our great city of New York City. We are recording on Wednesday, February 26th, around noon Eastern time. This mayoral election. So, we've got Adams, who now no longer has this, for at least the time being, this DOJ case against him, stipulated that he's historically unpopular as a mayor of New York City. As you look ahead, first of all, for people who aren't following it, give us a sense of the calendar, and two, who you take seriously in this race, because unlike the presidential, we're in the middle of this race now for
Yes,
mayor
very
of New York
much
City.
so.
Yeah.
I'm currently laboring on a Substack piece I hope to publish very soon about this. I'll give the preview and explain it how I see it. So right now you have what is a very unusual mayoral primary. An incumbent mayor has not lost re-election since David Dinkins in 1993. That is very likely to happen this year. Eric Adams is deeply unpopular. He was even unpopular before he was indicted. So obviously the indictment, the Trump DOJ dropping the charges, that has all hurt him. But it's important to remember there's a Quinnipiac poll at the end of 2023 that showed him the lowest approval rating of any mayor since Quinnipiac was polling City Hall, and that goes back to the 1990s to Giuliani. So he'd lost the city. He's been an incompetent mayor, embroiled in various scandals. New Yorkers are tired of him. I think that is something that is obvious at this point. Every poll shows him with a clear cap on his support. He has support. He has a working class base. He's not a zero. He's got money in the bank. He's going to fight it out. But realistically, it's very, very hard for him to win this primary. He missed the deadline to become a Republican unless he gets the approval of 3 out of 5 Republican county leaders. That's not going to happen. He can run as independent, and I don't think he'd win as an independent. So you start with Adams, very likely DOA, and I think that's consensus now. I've been arguing that for now a couple of years, but now that's sort of broad-based opinion. Andrew Cuomo, of course, looms over the entire field. He is threatening to run. He might run as soon as the beginning of March. You have a petitioning deadline. You'd have to get in next month, get in March. I believe petitions are due end of March or beginning of April. So, petitioning is not very hard if you're an experienced candidate, but he's got to decide soon. Cuomo in every poll is the front runner. It's inarguable. He, of course, resigned in disgrace in 2021. He had a sexual harassment scandal. He had many scandals related to his handling of the pandemic. I believe that those are all going to come back to haunt him. But as of now, he is well ahead of the field. He has real strengths. He's experienced. He has policy accomplishments. He was governor for over a decade. Given the chaos of the Adams years, Cuomo as executive definitely appeals to people, and Cuomo is likely to try to assemble a similar coalition as Adams. You're talking about Black and Latino working class voters, plus Orthodox Jews, plus perhaps a mixture of white liberals who have nostalgia for his COVID press conferences or just feel he's the man to run the city, right? So you start there. Cuomo is formidable. Is Cuomo inevitable? And I wrote a piece about this in New York Mag not long ago. I don't call him inevitable because one, no one is inevitable, and two, there's still a lot of time left in this race. That's something to remember. It's about to be March. The primary is the end of June, right? It's a ranked choice voting primary, which makes it very interesting. It makes it so you can do real coalition building and do cross endorsements in the way you might do in a parliamentary democracy. And I think you're going to see more strategic voting this time around as New Yorkers get used to the system and candidates recognize also the benefits of the cross endorsement. So Cuomo, when he gets in, assuming he gets in, is going to face the wrath of the rest of the field. Who's in the field right now? There's a lot of candidates. The easiest way to think of it right now is who qualify for public matching funds. The answer is 4. So there are 4 candidates now who are getting multi-million-dollar matching fund payouts. In my view, those are the 4 who get taken seriously. So that's Scott Stringer, who ran in 2021, had his own Me Too scandal. He's back. He's got a good deal of money. Brad Lander, the city controller. Stringer used to be the controller. Lander is running in the so-called progressive lane. He's also got a lot of money in the bank. He comes out of Brooklyn. Stringer comes out of Manhattan. Both are white. Both are Jewish. So there's going to be an interesting fight over their base. But
Which
also
is different,
Stringer,
by the way, like just for people who don't follow New York City.
Yeah.
There's the liberal Jewish vote, and then, as you alluded to before, there's the Orthodox Jewish vote. And those are two humongously important voting blocks. It sounds like, based on what you said earlier, that there's a strong sense that Cuomo carries the Orthodox vote.
So the Orthodox vote's complicated. So we can go in the weeds here. If this is a podcast, we can do that. So the Orthodox vote in New York can be understood in a few different ways. You have what you'd call like the modern Orthodox and those who are observant. Maybe they live in Midwood and Borough Park and parts of Queens and Riverdale. They will probably support Cuomo. I think that's his base. The Hasidic Jewish community, which is very large as well, and tends to block vote depending what their rabbi does.
The most important voting block in all of New York City politics, I think. Because they're one vote.
Because they block vote. Yeah. I mean, they're still, I think, in an electorate like this, for like 1 million people might vote. They're not going to swing it, but yeah, you want to it'd be good to have some Hasidic Jewish block votes in your corner. they
Hmm.
dislike Cuomo because of the pandemic, and there were a lot of tensions going back to 2020 and how he implemented lockdowns, and there was a feeling in the Orthodox Jewish community that he was targeting Jewish neighborhoods in particular, and Cuomo never formally apologized to them. So I do talk to
It's not his
people in those
style.
communities,
Yeah.
not his style. So there is a Hasidic Jewish um, vote in particular that I think is skeptical of Cuomo. I can see the
Hmm.
more modern Orthodox going with him. The real
Hmm.
hardcore members remember 2020 very well and feel Cuomo, despite him being pro-Israel and all these things, was anti-Semitic towards them. So he's got that he's got to iron out. He's also got to fight out the working and middle class black vote with Eric Adams, because Adams not going anywhere.
That's what
Adams is very
ranked choice, though.
combative.
You just
That's
need to
with
be number
rank.
two.
You can be two in all those neighborhoods. That might be his hope. To go back to the field, you got four candidates: Lander, Stringer, Zellner, Myrie, state senator out of Brooklyn, who's Afro Latino, and Zoran Mamdani, assemblyman out of Queens, who is the DSA candidate, and he's someone I know very well. He actually ran my state senate campaign, so I
Oh,
I
really?
give that as a yes. I know Zoran very well, so I give that as my caveat. If I talk about him, people can weigh what I say
Well,
and
okay. Here's a
decide if I'm
problem that
being
Zoran
if I'm
has.
being honest.
Yeah, here's a problem that
Yeah.
Zoran has that, because my guy, not my guy, I haven't picked anybody in the race, but a guy that I have a strong relationship with is Zellner Myrie.
Yes.
Zellner Myrie and Zoran Mamdani being two of the candidates who don't have very high name recognition, if I'm being honest, is a problem for both of them. Those names sound awfully similar.
Yeah.
It's like, but they have very different politics. Not very different. One is a
Yeah.
centrist-ish in Zellner for New York City. It's New York City centrist, which is not a
Yeah.
national
He,
centrist, and
he
Zoran
he
is
was a
more
proud
left.
progressive in the state legislature. He's now kind of running towards the middle, which is, I would say, that's how I would
That's
describe
why I
him
like him, and probably why you may
moving.
not. Yeah.
No, I know, and I know Zellner personally. I met Zellner in 2018. I know him personally. I've had always good interactions with him. So I know, I'd say all the four mentioned, I know them all decently. Zoran, I'm the closest with. But I think the way to describe Zellner versus Zoran is Zellner has the higher ceiling. Zoran is politically more talented. If Zellner had Zoran's like natural charisma and excitement factor, Zellner could be the easy runner up to Cuomo right now in this primary field. Zellner's got to break out. He's been down in polling. Zoran's actually pulled ahead of him, which has been interesting at times. They've been sort of neck and neck. Um, but I think the challenge for each of them is Zoran's got a clear base that Zellner needs to create. Zoran is going to run up the score with left-leaning younger voters in Western Queens and in Northern Brooklyn, and into Central Brooklyn, the so-called, gentrifying neighborhoods, the gentrifying belt, what have you. Easy to sneer at them, say, oh, the hipsters, the yuppies, whatever. But they're voting now. They're registered Dems. Turnout in Zoran's AD in 2021 was higher than the AD that includes Jamaica Queens, which is something that wasn't true in 2013. So the turnout's high there, so he comes with a base that's very real. I'd say his challenge is he's anti-Zionist and he's obviously a proud socialist. There are voters who won't touch that. That is a real thing. Beyond Orthodox Jews, you're even just sort of center left pro-Israel voters, perhaps affluent white liberals who are property owners or just have are living high high rent luxury rentals in Manhattan or something like that, who are voters too. They're not going to touch Zoran. So Ken Zoran, with his real political abilities and his abilities to raise money, he might max out, and he's cut great online ads and gotten a lot of press attention. Can he grow beyond that cap? We don't know what that ideological cap is, but the reality is it's probably there. Also,
Mhm.
Zoran himself is not running on defund the police, but DSA supports it. So if Zoran continues to build momentum, I would not be surprised if his rivals come at him and say, "Oh, do you want to cut the police budget in half like your brethren?" And he'll have to come up with an answer. He's very articulate. He's very bright. He genuinely is probably the best communicator the far left has. He's very good. So,
And
but that's a challenge. That's real. I don't know how far he can go
rank
realistically.
choice is a problem for him, because I think in a world where it's just a plurality of vote, the durability of his base and the fact
He's
that
got
he
the
is,
base.
yeah, that helps
Yes.
him. Rank choice
Can
could
he?
help Zellner because he's so
Yes.
he's likable. So in a world where
Yes.
like his dream scenario is Cuomo and Eric Adams fight to the death,
Mm.
and the black vote is listing Zellner second instead of uh,
Yes,
Cuomo
exactly.
second, and
Yes.
the liberal Jewish vote is listing Zellner second to Brad Lander, and you start to assemble a coalition. It is as uphill a battle as any we've had before. I have a
Yes.
hard time imagining. I mean, your politics are really hard for me to like square because like you're, and like people probably say that about me too. Is like, do you think New York is going to elect a socialist in this environment? Like maybe it's just the corners I've been spending time in, but I feel like
Yeah.
people are heading in the opposite
It
direction
it
in New
would
York.
it would be hard. I'd say Zoran will push it as far as is possible given his actual talent. I think it's be very hard to do it realistically. Also, there's other challenges. You know, he's 33 years old and he's been in the state legislature a few years, right? I mean, it is an environment where I think executive experience is going to go a long way. I think there are candidates who could run in this race and do very well who aren't running, like Tish James, for example, seems to be happy as attorney general. She got in tomorrow. Tish would be a front runner. Um, the other Tish, Jessica Tish, who just became police commissioner, she's a very serious future
I would
mayoral
love that.
candidate. Very in the Bloomberg mold, could self fund, could drop, 50 mil in a campaign tomorrow, probably, and not think about it. She just became police commissioner, though, and the Post wants her to run, but she'd have to resign. It's hard to see when you just became police commissioner, you're 44 years old. She can realistically do this for the next 8 years at least, then run for mayor. I don't quite see her doing it. Can a socialist get elected mayor? I think it could happen in New York City. Is it going to happen now? I mean, it's going to be very hard for him, as it will be very hard for Zellner as well. I think Zellner's got the higher ceiling. There's no doubt. There's a world where Zellner could assemble the Bill de Blasio 2013 coalition. If I were Zellner, that's what I'd be trying to do. Working in middle class black voters in Brooklyn, white liberals and progressives, some Latinos as well, and some Asians, and you build that. The De Blasio 2013 coalition was quite powerful. De Blasio is also very good at both being pro development and pro tenant. He's one of those mayors I think will age better, sort of a De
You and I
Blasio
disagree on
apologist.
this, but I like this
Yeah,
take though. I like a hot take, and you and
he
I will
had he
never see
had
eye to eye on De Blasio.
yeah, he had one of the only center left executives in America who had like very tangible accomplishments that outlasted him. Obama being one of them, obviously, the Obamacare pre-K, UPK is going to stand the test of time. I think for that alone, yeah, he's the real deal. Made many mistakes, had many flaws and many failures. But if you look back to his insights on policing and real estate in particular, that they were quite good in retrospect. De Blasio's never for defund. He actually wanted more cops hired. He talked reform, not gutting the department. I think he's very reasonable about stop and frisk. And I think on real estate, I think his views have aged decently where he really tried to build more housing, but also is pretty pro tenant. And I think there's a way to do both of those things. And I think Zellner is striking that balance as well. So if I were Zellner, I'd be looking at the 2013 campaign as a blueprint. And of course, we haven't talked about Lander and Stringer. Stringer also has a high ceiling, I believe, but needs to really start to excite people and get out there. Because I think Stringer is someone who has all the executive experience. He is a progressive, but I think unlike Lander, he can more pivot to the center and he can show up on more ballots. I think
Yeah,
just as Zoran and Lander will probably be dropped from some ballots, I think Stringer and Myrie can be on a lot of ballots. And I think the question for both of them is, well, can you have a compelling message and get people excited? Because that is the name of the game, right? I don't know. And so for the four of them, they're the four serious ones, plus Cuomo, plus Adams. That's really what your race is right now. So the major question is, can Cuomo be stopped? The answer is maybe, maybe not. Very
yeah.
boring. I don't know. Um, but they're the four. They got the matching funds. Those are the four now you should focus on because the others, Jessica Ramos on paper would have been a great candidate. No matching funds. Sorry.
Yeah. Well,
Can't
I think
can't
that
do it. Can't do it
Lander
in this race.
Lander is going to be an interesting test case because from my circles, and I live in Brownstone, Brooklyn, so this would be his
Yes,
constituency.
that's his. Yes.
There is a sense that he is inauthentic. I don't know the man personally, but that is the
Yeah.
conversation that's happening on the ground amongst people who are his closest constituents. I think Stringer, who I know pretty well, has a different problem, which was he was tailor made for the last race that
Yes.
he was
He
embroiled in that
was.
scandal, because that race was wide open, and he's a student of New York City politics. He's been around the block.
Yes,
He
absolutely.
he had a good perch in the comptroller's office at that time. Um, he's not dynamic enough in this kind of race where you have big personalities. I think that's going to be hard. It's in some ways related to Zellner, but Zellner has the benefit of a clean slate, and like he
Yes,
can
being
position himself as
younger,
bolder.
more
Yeah,
interesting.
yeah,
I agree with. I mean, Lander. Compare Lander to Zoran. It's a great example. Zoran is more to the left than Lander, quite a bit, especially since Israel Palestine comes up so much. Zoran is very much to the left of Brad Lander. But if you talk to sort of like the median Democrat, they'll say, "Oh, Lander hates Israel. Lander's this. Lander's that." I think Lander's problem is he's been caught in the middle in a lot of issues. Zoran, love him or hate him, everyone knows where he stands, right? They can say, "Oh, Zoran, I can't believe how pro-Palestine is or how much he anti-Israel he is," but he's not lying about what he believes. Like,
right.
he's been in
Lander
trenches a long time.
Lander's trying to
Lander,
thread the
it's
needle.
tough.
Yeah,
He's threaded a lot of needles. When I think of Brad Lander again, he's very talented, very smart. He's got a lot of great plans for running for mayor. He wrote this Medium post, I think, back around 2016. It was something like why I'm a Democratic socialist supporting Hillary Clinton. And I thought that like summed up Brad Lander pretty well in that he'd been a member of DSA apparently since the 1980s. He was like an original DSA member, but could not bring himself to support Bernie in 2016. So I think that hurts you with a lot of different people, right? Because the moderate isn't appeased, right? And then the leftist is not appeased either. Because what people do want is authenticity. People think Trump is authentic, right? They think Bernie is authentic. They
Ross, this
think
is why I have good relationships
this,
with the people like
this is what they
AOC
want.
and Ramos and a lot of these people, is not because I pretend to like Bernie Sanders. I will sit across from every one of them and tell
Yeah,
them I very much don't agree with like a whole lot about Bernie Sanders, and will poke fun and prod that coalition.
yeah,
But the thing that we have in common is that they do it back to our coalition, and we have an honest conversation about where we have overlap. I
yeah.
think the problem with these Lander style politicians is they were counting on people not to be paying attention. And
Mhm.
I think like the people pay attention, like especially when you talk about these very defined coalitions within New York City. You talk about like the Bernie DSA style coalition, the pro charter
Yes.
coalition that I'm a part of, like, like the people like me or Tusk or somebody like that. People could say whatever they want about our politics, but we pay attention to our politics. Like it's like we're
Mhm.
reading all the statements people make. If people are bad on our
Yes.
issues, we know about it. And the same is true of the DSA style candidates and the Bernie coalition, Ramos, AOC. Like they're paying attention, and I think like the
Yes.
Ramos, the Lander types only succeed in a world where people aren't paying attention, which is why the defined coalitions have a hard time lining up behind him unless he's greasing the skids, right? Like in some jobs that he's had, you can form good
or
alliances with the
or
right
you have
interest
just
groups.
a natural charisma and political ability to join fractious groups together even if you yourself do not always seem authentic, right? And
Right.
I think a challenge for Lander again, who I do respect. He is the caricature of the woke liberal, for lack of a better word. I
Yes.
think you mentioned Bernie, for example. I think one strength of Bernie is that at no point did he himself. I think he got dragged in that direction. But if you look at Bernie's statements around defund the police, Bernie was never for defending the police. He was never for open borders. He obviously in Vermont was vaguely pro-gun. He had this sort of native understanding of like the cultural differences in America. I think there's a certain type of liberal. Obama had that same understanding as well. There's a certain type of liberal, certain type of Democrat who just does not. And I think the problem with Lander, he does exude the brownstone Brooklyn liberalism that seems cloistered, that seems still attached to using terms like Latinx and all these things that I think most Democrats have moved away from, but you know, the sort of blue sky set are still into. And I think that is his challenge. In a weird way, Zoran is the most left candidate in this race. He's the far left, he's the socialist left. He seems less woke in many ways than Brad Lander. That's like a strange thing to
Well,
say. When you look
okay,
at Zoran and you
but
look at Brad, one guy is clearly more woke than the other,
well,
right?
this is a
But
weird thing that
what
you and
one
I will
guy
have to.
comes off as more woke, and that's also an affect thing. It is also sort of ineffable how you present yourself, which comes into politics as well.
Yeah, this is something that's a good place to end. Is like, the next time I have you on is something we can explore, which is there are different parts of what it means to be left. And what's interesting is why do you and I and you and Bradley all get along, right? It's because I think we all are skeptical of the woke wing of the party. So we may have like different
Yes.
economic policies and all this kind of stuff. Although I do think there's a lot more in common, and good
Yeah, I
conversations to be
enjoy
had.
Bradley's Substack. He's right about free school lunch and things
Yeah,
like that, which
I think we're pro
I
housing
support.
development, right? A lot of us, and
Yes. Yeah.
so like I think there's a lot more that we have in common. But what we certainly have in common is a skepticism of the performance, and I think that's a good
Yes.
unifying mechanism across that divide.
Tiring performative politics. I agree. I think we're
Yes.
all weary of it.
Well, okay, Ross, plug away. I know you got a lot of good stuff going on, so tell our
Okay,
audience where
great.
they can
Well,
find your work.
I'll plug first. I have a book coming out in May, Glass Century. It's a great novel. You should pre-order it. Plug my Substack. Just you can search Ross Barkan in Substack or political currents that will pop up. Please subscribe. And also the Metropolitan Review, which is on Substack. You should subscribe to that as well. You get new reviews on books and film and all sorts of great essays almost every single day. We have a massive backlog of pieces. So you got a lot to read. We are not shortchanging you, and it's only you can subscribe for $50 a year. So it's a really good deal. You're getting a lot for $50.
Well, Ross, thank you very much, my friend.
Yeah, thank you for having me. This was fun.
Thank you very much, everybody. Remember to rate, review, subscribe. We love those qualitative reviews where you go on Apple Podcasts or wherever and say what you like about the pod, and give us 5 stars. You could also send in voicemails. Our number is 321-200-0570. Thank you.